DJ Scream, heavy in the streets.
We gon' get it, we gon' get it, we gon' get it. We gon' get it, we gon' get it. Get it in blood. Get it in blood. We gon' get it, we gon' get it, we gon' get it. We gon' get it, we gon' get it. Get it in blood. Get it in blood.
Hood rich.
Get it out the mud.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Saints and Appetizers podcast. And we're coming at you with some appetizers here. It's been about 3 weeks since we've had any appetizers for you, and I'm talking about UFC 295 Prochazka versus Pereira, and that's event is going to be on November 11th, which is a Saturday, 2023, held at Madison Square Garden, MSG, New York City, New York, and that will be 10 Eastern, 9 Central Time on pay-per-view. And I'll be mostly just following and covering the main event here, the main card, you know. But this is another card like what, two pay-per-view events in a row where they've where it looks like it's going to be like an amazing card, and then the main card gets blown up and almost just blows up the entire card, because that happened at UFC 294, because you had you had Charles Oliveira pulling out of the fight against Alexander or against Islam Makhachev with a cut over his eye, and then you had Prochazka pulling out of the fight with Hazmat Jemaya due to a shoulder injury. Well, just a couple weeks later, 3 weeks later, for pay-per-view event here, they're having to make the Jiri Prochazka versus Alex Pereira fight the main event now, because the main event was, you could maybe argue, was going to be the main event, the headliner of the year. But that fell through because John Jones ended up tearing a pectoral muscle while he was in training and wrestling. So it was going to be Stipe Miocic versus John Jones for the World Heavyweight Championship bout. But now they've had to flip that whole matchup upside down on its head due to him pulling out. So they're going to have an interim bout now with Sergey Pavlovich versus Tom Aspinall. And just the whole card is kind of flipped upside down just due to injuries, because you got to also mention Jamal Hill in there, because before he tore his or ruptured his Achilles, he was the interim light heavyweight bout, and he was scheduled to fight Jiri Prochazka for a unifying light heavyweight bout, but he's also injured. So just a lot of injuries at the moment at these higher weight classes, and any, it seems like a lot of top championship title holders are having some bad luck due to injuries. But this is a card. It could have been better, obviously, if it would have had John Jones and Stipe Miocic as the original headliner on it. But still, it's got a couple interesting fights on it. You know, the top 3 fights have all superstar, very notable fighters, but it just doesn't have that real attention getter that the Stipe Miocic John Jones fight would have had. And then when you get into the main event, it's it's also fighters that this just takes away from the American excitement to it. It's because it's hard to gauge a personality, it's from reading subtitles, from your top contenders, your top fighters on this card. Sergey Pavlovich, he's what is he, Swedish or something? No, he's Russian. And then and then Alex Pereira is a is is Brazilian, and then Jiri Prochazka is like from the Czech Republic. So I don't know. It's harder. Seems like it's a little harder to fall in love with guys that you can't verbally connect with. It's just hard to if you don't speak their language. It's kind of hard to just figure out what their kind of personality is. So takes it. That really hurts this card, because everyone either loves or hates John Jones, and then pretty much just everyone loves Stipe Miocic. I mean, the guy's a damn firefighter. Can't hate on a man that serves this country. But yeah, anyways, this card just I'm not overly excited about this card. I'm a big Alex Pereira fan, so I'm excited to see him fight, and same with Jiri Prochazka as well, because he looked dominant and impressive in his fights before he got hurt. It would have been really interesting to have seen him in the rematch against Glover Teixeira, but because he got hurt and never got to see it. But anyways, let's get into this main card and some of these picks on this main card. Some of my thoughts here about who I'm going to go with. So, anyways, can I get a menu? And so this would be the main card. The main card doesn't start till 10 Eastern, 9 Central time. So it's a pretty late start on this card, but there's 5 fights on the main card, and so the first fight on the main card is a featherweight bout between Diego Lopez versus Pat Sabatini. And, see here. So Diego Lopez, he's had a couple fights in the UFC, not quite as many, I believe, as Pat Sabatini. Sabatini's had quite a few fights, but Diego Lopez, just over his last 4 fights, he's 3-2 or 3-1. We'll go over the last 6. His last 6, he's 3-3, so he's at 500. And his last 2 fights were his first fights in the UFC. So he fought at UFC 288, and then which he lost that fight, but then he won his first fight at UFC on ESPN 50, Sanhagen versus Font. He actually won that fight by submission over Gavin Tucker, but he had lost his first fight in the UFC by unanimous decision. So not like he's getting dominated in any of the losses, or hasn't looked like he belongs in the UFC, even though there's only like a 2-fight sample size there. But in total, he's been in 28 total fights with 22 wins and 6 losses. In those 22 wins, he has 8 wins by knockout, 12 by submission, and 2 by decision. And then the 6 losses, he's been knocked out twice, never been submitted, and 4 losses by decision. So I mean that shows you that he can beat you in a variety of ways, but obviously he wants to take you down, try to get that submission, that arm bar or knee bars, or definitely likes the arm bar, rear naked choke. He likes the arm bar a lot. And he's just the fact that he has so many wins. Majority of his wins come by not by submission, but he's never been submitted. So that shows you that he's got a great ground game, and just like all Brazilian jiu-jitsu, I'm sure he's dedicated to BBJ, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and having his black belt and all that. But he's definitely a fighter that's gonna look to try to get the submission over Pat Sabatini. All right, and now onto his opponent, Pat Sabatini. He's kind of a similar fighter honestly, but he's had a lot more fights in the UFC. He's had 5 fights in the UFC. Let's see, and he's had 6 fights in the UFC, and he is 5-1 in those 6 fights. So he's doing really good. He won his last fight against Lucas Almeida, which was which he won that by submission, triangle choke, and then his only loss that he's had in the UFC came back in September 17th, 2022. So a little more than a year ago, he was knocked out by Damon Jackson, the TKO punches. But besides that, he's been really good and really shown that he's really competitive and really belongs in the UFC. So he's been in 22 matches, close to the same amount, just a couple more fights Diego Lopez has been in, but he has 22 fights, 18 wins, 4 losses, and he has two wins by knockout, 11 wins by submission, 5 by decision, and then in the 4 losses, he's been knocked out twice, similar to Diego Lopez. He's been knocked out twice, but he's never been submitted, just like Diego Lopez. These guys are very, very similar fighters, dedicated to Brazil, black belt and Brazilian jiu-jitsu and NCAA wrestler. That's what they're about, is the ground game. And so never been submitted, and then has 2 losses by decision. So just going off of this, going off of record and experience, I think I'm gonna have to go with Pat Sabatini in this, just because of the fact that he's been in 6-2 fights in the UFC, so he's already fought like higher competition, and he's already got what 5-1 wins in the UFC already. So he's just a seasoned veteran and experienced, But just because the fact that these guys are similar fighters, they like the wrestling game, they like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, they like to get submissions, but neither one of them have ever been submitted. I think this fight's probably going to be kind of a stalemate, is what's going to happen. Either that's what's going to happen, that's what happens. But lots of times when you have 2 ground fighters fight each other, it just kind of turns into a stalemate, or it ends up turning into a slugfest where one of them decides that they want to keep it on the feet, and it turns into more of a striking battle, and whoever has better striking ability ends up coming out on top. But neither one's really been knocked out that many times either. So I think I'm going to go with Pat Sabatini to win this fight by unanimous decision, or just decision. So in your featherweight bout between Diego Lopez versus Pat Sabatini, I got Pat Sabatini winning by decision. All right, on to the second fight on the card. It's a lightweight bout between Matt Frevola versus Benoit Saint Denis. Benoit Saint Denis versus Matt Frevola. Let's see here. Matt Frevola has had a lot of fights in the UFC, actually, more than I've probably seen in the past. He's had one, two, and so he's been in 10 fights in the UFC, and he is 4-2 in his last 4-2 in his last 6 fights, and he's on a 6-fight win streak. He's been knocking people out in his last 3 fights. He's knocked out Gennaro Valdez, TKO'd him at UFC 270, and then Otman Azatar, Otman Azatar knocked him out at UFC 281, and then his most recent fight, which was this year, just a couple of months ago, May 6th, 2023, he got TKO knockout over Drew Dober. So he's on a bit of a hot streak here, knocking people out on a win fight in the UFC. He's had quite a few fights in the UFC. He's had 15 fights total, and then 11 wins and 3 losses. In those 11 wins, he has 4 wins by knockout, 3 by decision, and 3 by submission, 4 by decision. And then the 3 losses, he's been knocked out twice. Another fighter that's never been submitted, and then he's lost 1 by decision, and then he's been in 1 draw. So seems like he's also more of a ground fighter, likes the Brazilian jiu-jitsu, but shows that he has striking ability and can knock you out. He's on a bit of a terror for that. And his opponent is Benoit Saint Denis, and he's on a winning streak himself. So he's he's 5-1 in his last 6 fights, and he's on a 4 fight win streak. He and all have come by way of finish. Nicholas Stolze, he got a submission rear naked choke over him at UFC. Volkov versus Rosenstruck, and then Gabriel Miranda, he TKO'd him at UFC Fight Night Gone versus Tuivasa, and then Ismail Bonfim, he face cranked him submission, and then Tiago Morcia, he TKO punches to him and that was at Gone versus Spivak. So he's on a bit of a terror of a win streak terror and a finishing streak as well. So these are kind of similar fighters in that regard. And, he has 14 fights with 12 wins and just 1 loss, and in those 12 wins, he has 3 by knockout, 9 by submission, none by decision, and then he's never been knocked out. Another fighter that's never been submitted, 1 win by one loss by decision, and then 1 no contest. And he's a pretty young up and coming fighter, only 27 years old, and has a very similar record to Matt Freevola. So in this lightweight bout, I'm gonna go for one of these fighters to pick up their first submission loss, and I think I'm gonna go with the younger guy. Both these guys have had about close to as many fights in the UFC, and both of them are on a bit of a winning streak here. I think Benoit Saint Denis is gonna lengthen his streak, add to his streak of 4 wins by stoppage and just four wins straight in the UFC, and he's going to break Matt Freevola's little three fight winning streak of knocking people out, and I think he's going to submit Matt Freevola. So in the second fight on the card, the lightweight bout between Matt Freevola versus Benoit Saint Denis, I got Saint Denis getting the win by submission. All right. On to the third fight on the card. We got some big names in the strawweight women's division here. Wouldn't surprise me if this is a fight that leads up to a title shot or a title eliminator fight, because these are 2 big names in the strawweight division, women's strawweight division. We have Mackenzie Dern versus Jessica Andrade. So that's Jessica Andrade, or Mackenzie Dern. She's definitely known for her Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Pan America, grappling, and submission tournaments. Like she definitely all about the ground game, And she is 4-2 in her last 6 fights, and just on a 1 fight winning streak where she beat Angela Hill and by decision. And then she lost the previous fight by that was just majority decision by Jan Exonon. Lost that at UFC Fight Night Dern versus Jan. And so she's 4-2 in her last 6 fights, and she has a ton of fights in the UFC. She has 11 of her fights come in the UFC, so close to all of them. She's had 16 fights, 16 fights total, with 13 wins, 3 losses. And she's been she's in the 13 wins. She has 6 wins by submission and 6 by decision. So she's not really much of a striker or someone that's trying to knock people out. And then in the 3 losses, she's never another fighter. This is a weird trend here with the fighters on this card. Another fighter that's never been submitted before, which it makes sense. She has abundance of gold from championships that she's won in grappling and submission tournaments. So she's not gonna get had on the ground. But then she's also must have a fairly good chin as well, because she's never been knocked out. She's never been submitted. But in the 3 losses, she has lost 3 by decision. But she's an impressive record, she doesn't get stopped, but she can definitely get the submission. She can take an arm bar or a knee bar or rear naked choke. She can take a appendage with her if she gets you in a submission. And then Jessica Andrade, she's a fighter that I've always kind of been a bit of a fan of, mainly just because she's has such so much power for the women's division. But man, she's on a bit of a rough streak here recently, and she's got a well-versed attack. She knows Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but her main strength is her strength. Her power. Just her being able to be a bully over women in the women division, and has that KO one knockout power for someone that weighs 125 pounds. It's just not that common. But man, she's had a bit of a rough stretch over her last 3 fights. But she's 3-3 in her last 6, but she's lost her last 3. Let's see. So they've all come by submission or knockout. She lost to Erin Blanchfield, submitted her rear naked choke, and that was at UFC Fight Night Andrade versus Blanchfield, which was February 18, 2023. And then she was KO'd by Jan Exonan. She was KO punched at UFC 284, and that was May 6, 2023. And then she was guillotine choked by Tatiana Tatiana Sarares, and that was at UFC on ESPN Sandhagen versus Font, March 5th, 2023. So she's kind of had a bit of a rough go of it since then. So she was, it seemed like there for a little while she was fighting for the strawweight and the flyweight championship like every other match that she was having. But she seems like things have come to kind of a roaring stop for her a little bit. She's had a rough go of it over her, definitely her last three fights. But these are fighters that similar, they have a similar skill set. Mackenzie Dern versus Jessica Andrade, but Jessica Andrade uh, wants to use her power, wants to use her bulliness, knockout power against Mackenzie Dern, and that really worked early on in Jessica Andrade's career. That really worked out well for her, but I don't know, as the divisions, the women's divisions have kind of evolved a little bit. It seems like it's not as uncommon for there to be a woman like her that has like the knockout ability. And in her career, she's had 36 fights, so she's been in tons of fights with 24 wins and 12 losses. In the 24 wins, she has nine wins by knockout, so she can, even as a smaller female fighter, she can get the knockouts. Only has 8 wins by submission and 7 by decision, so very well rounded in the way that she can get the win. And then in the 12 losses, she's been knocked out 5 times. She's been submitted uh, uh, 4 times, and she's been lost 3 by decision. So she's shown that she can be finished. So I'm a fan of Jessica Andrade, but I think she's on a bad streak here, and maybe just 1 or 2 more fights from being out of the UFC, which is kind of sad. But in this women's strawweight bout between Mackenzie Dern versus Jessica Andrade, I'm going with Mackenzie Dern. I think she's going to get a submission. I think Jessica Andrade is going to get stopped again 4 times in a row and lose 4 fights in a row. And Mackenzie Dern is going to use that champion grappling and submission champions, all that gold, and add to her submission wins, take it from 7 to 8. So that'll be two submission wins in a row there for Benoit St. Denis and then Mackenzie Dern. All right, on to the co-main event. It's the heavyweight bout between Sergey Pavlovich versus Tom Aspinall, which is just kind of a bit of a tier that we're not getting what we were banking on. We were hoping to get probably the retirement fight for Stipe Miocic, and maybe even the retirement fight bout for John Jones, seeing if he won or he lost this belt. He's already talked about only wanting to fight a couple more times before retiring, and I imagine if he takes a year to come back from this pectoral injury, that I would be surprised if he fought and defended the belt like multiple times after that. I could very well see him like winning the belt back and unifying it, and then like retiring like right after. Just like I see that's what would happen with Stipe, whether he wins or loses this fight, or loses that fight that hasn't happened, or we don't know if it's still going to happen or not. I could see him like putting his gloves down like right after even winning the belt. But alas, we end up getting a heavyweight interim title bout between Sergey Pavlovich and Tom Aspinall instead. I mean, you can see the excitement on my face. But I get serious here a little bit. But both of these guys are straight up killers, beasts, murderers in the heavyweight division. They get stops, and they get performances of the night and knockouts of the night. So I mean, there's going to be fireworks in this bout, regardless, in the heavyweight championship bout, regardless. And I think both of these guys, can have wrestling. Pavlovich obviously knows how to wrestle from being from Russia, and part of Eagles MMA, Eagles gym, So of course he knows how to wrestle, but he's been beating people up with KO punches and and ground and pound instead of like your typical wrestling. He is 6-0 in his last 6 fights, and every single one of those fights has come by way of knockout. And here's just like the last three that came by knockout. So he TKO punched Derek Lewis at UFC 277 on July 30th, 2022. And then he KO punches Taya Tuivasa at UFC on ESPN Thompson versus Holland at December 3rd, 2022. And both of those were in the first round. Lewis was 55 seconds in the first round, and Taya Tuivasa was 54 seconds in the first round. That's just nuts. And then in his most recent fight, he TKO punches Curtis Blades at UFC Fight Night Pavlovich versus Blades, and that was April 22nd, 2023. So that was this year, and that was in the first round. That was 3 minutes and 8 seconds of the first round. And the three prior fights that all came by TKO punches were all in the first round. So he's just knocking heads off right now, and on in a flow state of being able to avoid getting knocked out at a heavyweight and knowing how to knock out other heavyweights. And it's pretty impressive with that record that he's got going. And his total record is 19. He has 19 total fights, 18 wins, 1 loss. In those 18 wins, 15 of them have come by knockout. So we know what he's trying to do. No submission, so he's not trying to submit you unless he's trying to get you to submit to punches. But he's a heavyweight, so there's probably not too many punches going to be landed in a row to where you're going to have to tap out, because you're probably going to sleep if he lands some unanswered punches like that while you're on the ground, hammer fist and whatnot. And then he has 3 wins by decision, and then he only has 1 loss. And then the 1 loss, shouldn't be surprising at all for a heavyweight. That's probably the majority of ways fighters lose their first fight or lose in the heavyweight division, is you either not knock them out or you get knocked out. And he got knocked out in his first and only loss by Alistair Overeem, TKO punches at UFC Fight Night Blades versus Ngannou 2, November 24th, 2018. And that was in the first round, 4:21 in the first round. So that's been a while. That was a good while ago, like 5 years ago, since he's lost and been knocked out. And I mean, it was to Alistair Overeem, who he's a legend in the mixed martial arts heavyweight division. So that's nothing to be too ashamed of for your one and only loss, and it being a knockout, to be to someone like Alistair Overeem, some horse meat in here, which I think he was probably off of it by 2018. And he's going against Tom Aspinall. And here's another fighter that was kind of on his way up for being like a up and comer or a title contender, and then he got hit with some injuries as well. That he got one of his most recent loss was due to a TKO, but it was like a knee injury where he like planted wrong, trying to either stuff a shot or try to go for a shot against Curtis Blades, and he blew his knee out, like ACL and all that business. And that was against Curtis Blades at Fight Night Blades versus Aspinall back on July 23rd, 2022. And then he was out for a year after that. And then in his most recent fight, he coming back like almost exactly a year later, July 22nd, 2023, he fought Marcin Tabora, and he knocked him out, TKO punches, and that at minute 13 of the first round. And he is 5-1 in his last 6 fights. 5-1 in his last 6 fights. So he's on a bit of a good run here, and like all those fights that he's won in the UFC, he's had 7 fights in the UFC, and of the six of them, they've all come by way of like either submission or knockout. So he's got a little bit of a more well-rounded way of being able to beat other heavyweights, because he can't not just only knock you out, he can also get you in a bad position, a situation where you're scrambling to try to get kind of recover from a punch, and then before you know it, you're caught in a rear naked choke, or you're got an arm bar or something on you, and it's impressive for a guy of his size. He's 6'5", 260, so it's pretty impressive. But in this heavyweight bout between Sergey Pavlovich versus Tom Aspinall, which this will be the interim. This will be for the interim UFC championship. I think I'm going with Sergey Pavlovich, and even though Tom Aspinall, he's been in 16 fights with 13 wins, 3 losses, 10 wins by knockout, 3 by decision, and then 3 losses. He has 1 loss, one loss by knockout, 1 loss by decision, and 1 loss by disqualification. But I think Sergey Pavlovich is going to add to Tom Aspinall's knockout total. So I'm in the heavyweight bout between interim championship bout, heavyweight championship bout between Sergey Pavlovich versus Tom Aspinall. I'm picking Sergey Pavlovich. I'm picking him to get the knockout, and with just the way these guys' fights have been going lately, they're either getting finished in the first, or they're getting the finish in the first. So I'm just picking Sergey Pavlovich to get the knockout in the first round, and say that with a grain of salt and a bit of confidence at the same time. All right, on to the main event. We have a light heavyweight bout between Jiri Prochazka versus Alexei Pereira, and this is a fight that we thought originally was going to be able to see like Jamel Hill versus him, and then next thing you know, we have Alexei Pereira running roughshod through the middleweight division, and then he gets the belt, doesn't hold the belt very long, and then he feels that it's better in his better interest to move up a weight class. So then you don't have we're not having Jiri Prochazka because he got hurt. He's not having the rematch against Glover Teixeira, and then because Jamel Hill got hurt, we're not having would have been, I guess that'd have been the unification bout for the UFC light heavyweight championship. But instead, we're having Jiri Prochazka versus Alex Pereira for the vacant. This is for the vacant light heavyweight championship. And Jiri Prochazka, he was pretty much just killing it, like dominating it in the UFC, like kind of like stuff that some people have never seen before, just with his style and striking ability and Muay Thai style. It's not as common as a style as just like championship wrestling, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but he's a deadly striker. In his last 6 fights, he's 6-6, and he I only had 3 fights in the UFC before he had won the belt, and then hurt, had to vacate it later due to injury. But he was on a 3-fight winning streak in the UFC over Volkan Oezdemir. He KO punch at UFC 251 at and that was July 12th, 2020. And then Dominic Reyes, KO, spinning back elbow at UFC on ESPN, Reyes versus Prochazka, and that was May 1st, 2021. And then in his last fight, this was before he got hurt and had to vacate it, and never got to see the rematch between these two because this was a crazy fight that no one expected it to go this way. But then he got the rear naked choke submission on Glover Teixeira at UFC 275, June 12th, 2022. And that was in the fifth round, like 4:32 of the fifth round, like at the closing moments of the fifth round. And no one ever would have expected Jiri Prochazka to get the submission over Glover Teixeira, who's just like a king of like wrestling and grappling and BBJ, you know. I think a lot of that loss and that submission choke was just due to Glover Teixeira being 40 plus years old and just being exhausted in that fight. But still, it's a shame that we'll never get to see the rematch between those two. But he has a lot of experience. You know, he's been in a lot of fights, not just in the UFC. Clearly, he's fought in a lot of fights in Ryzen and over in Japan. But he's had 33 fights with 29 wins and just 3 losses in the 29 fights. 29 fights, the 29 wins. He has 25 of them have come by knockout, which that's nuts. That's nuts. And then just 3 by submission, 1 by decision, and then in the 3 losses, he's been knocked out twice as well, and then been submitted. So he shows that not often that happens, but he can be stopped as well, and then none by decision, and then just 1 draw. This is a perfect example of styles make fights, and this right here, I'd be surprised if I'd be surprised if this fight goes all 5 rounds, and I'd be surprised if someone doesn't get knocked out in this fight. So Alex Pereira, he doesn't have quite as long of a record, you know, not as long of a record, not as much experience in mixed martial arts, but he has a long history of professional kickboxing glory and K1 and all that. So just definitely made his name in glory and beating Israel Adonijah. And he was the bane of Israel Adonijah's existence there for a little while, having beat him twice in kickboxing and knocking him out once in kickboxing, and then coming to the UFC, and then after just like a handful of fights, he's fighting for the belt, and he beats Israel Adonijah again by knockout, and has the middleweight bout. But Israel Adonijah was able to vanquish him, you know, in their rematch at UFC 287. He ended up getting the knockout April 8th, 2023, in the second round, 4 minutes and 21 seconds of the second round, and lost the belt. But I just liked his story. I love the storylines and the headlines of him coming up from boxing and being like the nightmare of Israel Adonijah, even though he wasn't able to keep it going and have like any kind of title reign in the middleweight division. But I just like him. You know, people kind of look at him as a T1000 type of fighter. You know, that he just constantly comes forward looking for the knockout, and you know, people praised him for his size at middleweight, but now he's moving up to light heavyweight. But he held his own against a large heavyweight himself, and Jan Blachowicz, who's I would say was one of the bigger light heavyweights in that division. And he's known for his great ground game and wrestling. And Alex Pereira was able to overcome it, and had that impressive first win in the light heavyweight division over a former light heavyweight champion. But he talked about how he hasn't had a lot of matches. He is 5-1 in his last 6 fights. He's had only He's only had 6 fights in the UFC, but it shows you how talented and how good he is because he's only had 6 fights in the UFC, but he's only had 10 total fights altogether, and has 8 wins and 2 losses. In the 8 wins, 6 of them have come by knockout and 2 by decision, and then only 2 losses had been knocked out once by Israel Donajay, and then had been submitted once as well. This is a fight where someone's getting knocked out, someone's getting sent to the outer realm with what they're going to be sent to the outer realm and back in this fight. I believe someone's getting knocked out, and I think there's a good chance it could happen in the first couple rounds here. So that's the only thing that's really saving the top of this card and the main card, is that there's could definitely be fireworks in the last 2 fights, the co-main event and the main event. And so with this fight here between Jiri Prochazka versus Alex Pereira, this may not be the wisest pick in the world, because I don't know why I've kind of become a fan over following Alex Pereira, over just his whole storyline with him and Israel Donajay. And I think these guys are very similar fighters. I think Alex Pereira is probably more of like your standard, fighter. Sticks to the rules a little bit more with how he's just a pure like kickboxer, while Jiri Prochazka, is known probably more for like spinning wheel kicks and spinning elbows and things like that, which Alex Pereira can do, but it's not as accustomed. You're not as accustomed to seeing that kind of stuff from Alex Pereira. But I'm making this pick probably more as a fan and just liking Alex Pereira during the whole storyline with Israel Donajay, and just kind of got to know him over that period of time. But I think these guys both have the same type of skill and the ability to knock each other out. So in the light heavyweight vacant championship bout between Jiri Prochazka versus Alex Pereira, I'm picking Alex Pereira to win this. I'm picking him to win this by knockout, either in the first or the second round. And he's going to claim his title as the light heavyweight champion and the two division champion. Not a champ because he doesn't currently hold the middleweight championship, but he'll be one of a handful of UFC fighters that can say that they held a belt at multiple weight classes. So that should be exciting, and I'm definitely excited for the top 3 fights, but the rest of the card is just kind of meh. And people love the makeup of UFC 294 with how they got good fill-ins for the fight against Islam Makhachev versus Charles Oliveira, and then Hazmat Jemaya and Paulo Costa. But that card, even with those fill-ins, I mean, and even getting to see Alexander Volkov get knocked out for the first time, even with those fillings, that card felt like a dud. So that's kind of the problem and the issue that this card is going to have to deal with a little bit. But I'm still ready for it. I'm still excited for it, and definitely would like to see my guy Alex Pereira get a belt back. But anyways, let's go over these picks real quick, see if I can remember them, and I can remember the varied of ways that they come to an end. So in the first fight on the main card is the featherweight bout between Diego Lopez versus Pat Sabatini, and I got Pat Sabatini to win this by to win this by decision. So nothing too exciting in the first fight, and then second fight, a lightweight bout between Matt Frevola versus Benoit Saint Denis. I have Benoit Saint Denis to get the first finish over, or the first submission win over Matt Frevola. So it'll be his first loss by way of submission in that bout there. And then the third fight on the main card is a women's strawweight bout between Mackenzie Dern versus Jessica Andrade. And I got Mackenzie Dern to add to her submission total from 7 to 8 and extend the losing streak that Jessica Andrade is on, which is sad because out of the fighters on this main card, I would say Jessica Andrade and Alex Pereira are the ones that I'm a fan of more than anything. So that's disappointing, but I think maybe her reign and peak as a top contender in the women's division has kind of come to a little bit of an end, and I think it's going to continue to be negative on Saturday. And then in the co-main event, which is a bout for the interim UFC heavyweight championship, is Sergey Pavlovich versus Tom Aspinall. And I'm picking Sergey Pavlovich to get the knockout in this fight, and I think it's probably going to come in like the first round. And if it's not him that's getting knocked out, if it's not Tom Aspinall getting knocked out, I think he'd probably be getting the knockout, or possibly an armbar or a submission choke. Like the finish is coming in the first round of this heavyweight championship fight. And then in the main event, light heavyweight bout between Jiri Prochazka versus Alex Pereira. I'm fandoming a little bit, fanboying a little bit, but I'm picking my guy Alex Pereira to win the UFC light heavyweight vacant championship, and he's going to do that. He's going to get that just like Sergey Pavlovich or maybe Tom Aspinall. He's going to get that by way of knockout, and I think that'll happen in the first or second round. And similar to the co-main event, if he's not the one getting the knockout or getting some way to stop the fight, Jiri Prochazka is probably going to be doing it to him if Pereira doesn't do it to him first. So I definitely see fireworks and some stoppages, especially in those last 3 fights. But I'm excited. I can't say I'm juiced up and thinking that this is the best card of the year, because that's definitely how it felt like it was going to be before John Jones and Stipe Miocic went off this card. Because even with that fight still on the card, you still were going to get to see Jiri Prochazka and Sergey Pavlovich. So you were going to get to see an official, like a real like title holder belt. Neither one of these are like for like the official belt. I guess the light heavyweight belt is considered vacant, but they're not. You're not gonna get to see an undisputed belt change hands now. But I'm here for it. So this is a November 11th, 2023, 10 Eastern, 9 Central Time, Madison Square Garden, New York City, New York, United States, UFC 295, Prochazka versus Pereira. So I'm here for it. I'm ready, and I hope we get some fireworks. So, but anyways, I think that's all I have for you. So with that, can I get a check, please?